Welcome back to Indus News. Well, we start from the United States, which says it wants to hit Iran's economy so it could come back to negotiate the nuclear deal. US Special Envoy Brian Hook, who is visiting America's allies in the Middle East, told this to a US House Foreign Affairs panel. Brian Hook says Washington does not want military action against Iran and says no one should doubt the US's desire for peace or its readiness to normalize relations. He says the deployment of 1,000 extra troops to the Middle East is a defensive measure. Hook avoided asking questions about the Trump administration if they're going to bypass Congress to declare war on Iran.
I'm not a War Powers Act scholar. I can only tell you that everything that we would do would be lawful. And everything that we are trying to do now is defensive. I can't underline, there is no talk of offensive action. We are trying to, it's a defensive move.
Now, Iran's Revolutionary Guard has said it shot down a US spy drone in the southern province of Hormozgan. US officials have confirmed an American military drone has been shot down in international airspace over the Strait of Hormuz. Earlier, the US military had rejected the claim, saying no US aircraft operated over Iranian airspace. Yemen's Houthis have targeted a power station with a cruise missile in Saudi Arabia's Jizan province. The rebels have stepped up missile and drone attacks on Saudi cities in the past 2 weeks. A White House spokesperson said US President Donald Trump has been briefed on the missile strike. Earlier, Yemen's Saudi-led coalition claimed intercepting a Houthi drone launched from Hodeidah. The coalition says the attack breached the Hodeidah ceasefire deal. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has accused Egyptian authorities of murdering former President Mohamed Morsi. He says the Egyptian government should be tried in the international courts. President Erdogan says Morsi died because medical aid was withheld when he collapsed during a court hearing. He called on the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to push action on the case. Earlier, the UN and Amnesty International called for an independent inquiry into ex-President Morsi's death. Well, China's President Xi Jinping has arrived in North Korea for a meeting with Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. Xi's two-day visit is his first Chinese state visit to Pyongyang since 2005. It comes a week before the G20 summit in Japan. He's accompanied by senior officials, including the head of the state, and North Korea's state media reports Xi's trip shows the strength of the two countries' relationship. It says Xi Jinping is visiting North Korea amid complex international relations. North Korea is under heavy international sanctions, and Beijing has defended its trade and business ties with Pyongyang. Mexico's Senate has ratified a trade deal with the US and Canada. The US-Mexico-Canada agreement sailed through the country's upper chamber with a 4 of 114 to vote for. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador called the result good news for Mexico. Mr. Obrador said the new agreement will bring foreign investment to the country. The pact was designed as a substitute for the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as the NAFTA. So far, Mexico's government is the only one out of 3 countries to ratify the treaty. In a tweet, US President Donald Trump congratulated López Obrador over the approval. Trump said now it's time for Congress to do the same. New Zealand has launched a multi-million-dollar 6-month weapon buyback scheme to compensate owners of prohibitive firearms. The ban was imposed after 51 Muslims were killed in 2 terrorist attacks on mosques in Christchurch in March this year. A joint statement by the Ministry of Police and Finance said $136 million have been set aside to compensate weapon owners. Up to 95% of the original cost will be reimbursed after the firearms are surrendered to the police. December 20th was announced as the deadline to hand over weapons. Police Minister Stuart Nash says the exercise aims to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future.
Compensation is necessary because of a new law agreed to by almost the entire Parliament in response to the events of the 15th of March. The buyback and amnesty has one objective: to remove the most dangerous weapons from circulation. Licensed firearm owners will get fair compensation for weapons handed in during the 6-month buyback and amnesty.
The United Nations is calling for more to be done to promote direct talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government. The UN envoy for Afghanistan, Tadamichi Yamamoto, was speaking at a Security Council meeting. Mr. Yamamoto says Germany and Qatar are working to organize an inter-Afghan dialogue, and he says efforts should be directed to the start of formal negotiations. He called upon countries directly in touch with the Taliban to intensify their efforts to this goal. Yamamoto says direct talks between the US and the Taliban continue with broad international support. At the Security Council, the US and other countries, including France, supported the German-Qatari initiative. Now, Moscow has rejected the findings of the investigations into the downed Malaysia MH17 airliner. 298 people were killed in 2014 when the aircraft was shot out of the sky. Russia's foreign ministry called the findings baseless. However, the Kremlin said it will continue to cooperate with the investigation. The investigators charged 3 Russians and a Ukrainian with murder for shooting down the MH17 jet over eastern Ukraine. The suspects will be tried in absentia, and neither Russia nor Ukraine extradite their nationals. According to Chief Prosecutor Fred Westerbeek, international arrest warrants have been issued for the 4 suspects. Meanwhile, Ukraine has welcomed the findings of the investigations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he hopes that the suspects will stand trial. The aircraft crashed in eastern Ukraine in July 2014, killing all 298 people on board. Leaders from across Europe are gathering at a summit that could see clashes over who fills the top jobs at Brussels. The summit will decide on the appointments for the next work cycle. Leaders will also discuss the financing of the Eurozone budget. The discussion will cover the EU's climate goals and strategic agenda for the next 5 years. The EU is expected to restate its position that Brexit cannot be renegotiated, irrespective of the new British Prime Minister. At least 16 civilians have been killed in regime airstrikes in Syria's northwestern province of Idlib. War monitors say 9 militants also died in neighboring Hama province. The latest violence comes after the United Nations urged Russia and Turkey to stabilize the situation in Idlib. Turkey and Syria's disagreement over the Idlib province safe zone has led to an escalation in clashes. War monitors say more than 400 civilians have been killed there since the last April. The Idlib conflict-free zone was agreed upon under the Astana Treaty by Russia and Turkey. Now, Kuwait and Iraq say wisdom and reason are needed to avoid tension in the Gulf region. Kuwaiti's Emir Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmad al-Sabah spoke on a visit to Iraq and said tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia have soared after attacks on oil tankers off the Persian Gulf. Well, we'll be back after this break with some more news. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus News. Well, at the LC Presidential Palace, France and Germany say they will increase their efforts to reduce tensions with Iran.
France and Germany's foreign ministers said at a press conference that time is running out and the risk of war cannot be ruled out. French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said unified efforts are needed to de-escalate tensions. He said Iran's actions have brought into question its commitment to the Vienna Convention.
We are worried about the escalation of actions and words. We feel the announcement made by the Iranian authorities about possibly calling into question their commitment to the Vienna Convention is preoccupying, and we believe it is not in the interest of Iran.
French Foreign Minister Le Drian said the exertion of pressure by the US is only contributing tensions with Iran.
We also consider the US decision to break with the Vienna Convention not a good thing, and that its maximum pressure campaign is contributing to tensions, so we want to unify our efforts so that there is a de-escalation process that can start.
Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said dialogue should be held to find a solution to bring down tensions.
The risk of war in the Gulf has not been averted, and we need to do everything we can so it doesn't come to this. That's why we are talking to all sides. I was in Tehran, Iran, and we are also talking with the Americans. It will be important to contribute a de-escalating factor to dialogue and to find solutions.
Britain, France, and Germany have planned a new push to keep Iran in the 2015 nuclear deal.
Now, as the crisis in Sudan continues, the head of Sudan's ruling military council has called on protest leaders to resume talks on the transfer of power, but without any conditions. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says Sudan needs a solution that satisfies all people. Talks between the military council and opposition collapsed in June after a crackdown on a sit-in that killed dozens. International Criminal Court prosecutor has demanded ex-President Omar al-Bashir stand trial for mass killings in Darfur. The United Kingdom says Sudan's generals must hand power to civilians to regain the trust lost after the deadly onslaught on protesters. In an interview, Britain's envoy to Khartoum, Irfan Sadiq, held the military responsible for the killing of dozens of protesters.
At the end of the day, the security forces who conducted these raids and led to the killings of the people. Therefore, the military council bears responsibility for taking the steps to build and rebuild the trust and confidence that will enable the civilian transition to occur.
A court in Nairobi has found 3 men guilty of abetting Somali militants who attacked Garissa University in northeast Kenya. The convict's sentence will be announced on July 3rd. The court acquitted a 4th suspect. 148 people, and including 142 students, were killed in the 2015 attack. In India, a token system has been introduced in the southern city of Chennai to distribute water. Indus News has this report.
Chennai, a city of 4.6 million people, is facing its worst water paucity in years. Under the new system, each token caters to 3 containers of water. The authorities have allocated the tokens based on family size for fair distribution. They said the government is taking measures for better water management.
As far as water management is concerned, the government is doing the maximum it has undertaken cleaning up of water tanks, lakes and reservoirs, and their deepening, for which 5 billion rupees has been allocated.
All 4 reservoirs that supply water to the city have run dry this summer, largely because of poor monsoon rains last year. A government think tank warned that Chennai and 20 other Indian cities could run out of groundwater by 2020.
In Syria, a 5-year blockade and a ferocious bombing campaign has taken its toll on eastern Ghouta. Local farmers are struggling to revive the area's agriculture. Indus News has this report.
Eastern Ghouta was once considered the breadbasket of Damascus. This is no longer the case after a 5-year siege and intense bombing by the Assad regime. The Syrian civil war has cost the area over 80% of its trees.
We need around 10 years to restore the situation to what it was before the crisis in the eastern Ghouta, because a lot of trees have been cut down. Here in Deir Asafir, there were olive trees that were 400 and 500 years old. They were cut, and the walnut trees were also cut. Even the famous Ghouta almond trees were cut, and they need at least 5 years to grow and produce fully again.
Some of the olive trees that were lost were over 500 years old. Farmers pinning their hopes on the last winter's record rainfall.
Rain has helped us a lot this year. The water level has increased significantly. We had to dig up to 150 meters deep to extract waters in previous years. But this year, we only had to dig 40 meters deep for water to come out in abundance. So thanks to the rain, we don't need to use so much petrol to get water from the well.
Even the cattle farmers have been affected. Many locals were forced to slaughter their livestock because they couldn't afford to feed them.
The strikes and the noise affected my cattle a lot. The cows did not produce milk because they were terrified. It was a very hard time and our situation was very bad. But now things have improved a lot and things have picked up.
It has been estimated that it will take 10 years for the area to regain its green cover. It will be another 5 years until those trees will bear fruit.
Now, is it high-tech policing or the rise of Big Brother? People's opinions in California are mixed because police in California are now using robots to keep an eye on the streets. More in this report. Now, a hungry polar bear has strayed hundreds of kilometers from its natural home to a Russian city in northern Siberia. They say climate change is forcing animals to leave their natural habitat to find new ways to survive. More in this report.
Residents of the Russian city of Norilsk in Siberia hadn't seen anything like it in 40 years. A hungry female polar bear wandered into the city's suburbs, probably in search of food. Famished, weak and ill, she lay on the ground for hours.
I would like probably to feed him as quickly as possible, and I wish him to live and survive. He should go there to the north.
Climate change has forced polar bears to scavenge for food on land, bringing them dangerously close to people. For this one, her weakness was obvious. When fit, she would be a different animal.
She is 30 to 35 meters away. She can overcome this in 4 jumps. She can sprint up to 60 kilometers per hour. Imagine it, and nothing will stop her because she is a beast. You must understand this.
According to a study, melting sea ice is leading to the starvation of polar bears, forcing them inland. It's hard to tell what this bear's fate will be.
She will put to sleep and sent either to the zoo somewhere in Russia, or she should be sent to its habitat, either to the coast of the Laptev Sea or the Kara Sea, because she came from there.
Polar bears live on the ice sheet and use it to catch fish, so they need it to survive. Global warming and melting sea ice makes that harder than ever.
Now, in business news, stocks in Asia have traded higher after the US Federal Reserve said it will cut its benchmark interest rate. Mainland Chinese shares were mixed in the early trade. The Shanghai Composite added 0.2%, while the Shenzhen component was fractionally higher. Hong Kong Hang Seng Index also jumped. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 gained 0.4%. Over in South Korea, the Kopsi was largely flat. Stock markets in Australia rose as well. Well, Mexico is launching a job creation program for El Salvador. The initiative is meant to curb the flow of illegal immigration in Central America and provide jobs in Mexico. More in this report.
The majority of migrants coming into the US from Mexico are no longer Mexican. Still, the country remains a major transit point for illegal immigration into the US. Under pressure from Washington, the Mexican government is now trying to fight the problem. The country is launching a job creation program in El Salvador.
Tomorrow in Tapachula, Chiapas, there will be a meeting between the President of El Salvador, President Bukele, who just took office, and President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. And the comprehensive development plan will start with a program that is called Sowing Life, which will be introduced tomorrow by both leaders.
The initiative is part of Mexico's Central America Development Plan. Investments are also planned for Honduras and Guatemala. The plan has been backed by Spain and Germany.
Mexico will contribute resources that will be announced tomorrow of several $1 million. This will start as financing from Mexico. The countries that have already made public their support for the plan include Spain, Germany, and we hope that in the coming days there will be support from other countries.
Poverty and a lack of opportunity are major factors in illegal migration to the US from Central America, but conflict is also a significant driver. El Salvador is particularly affected by drug-related violence. 262,500 El Salvadorans in the US will lose their temporary protected status this September.
Well, we got some rain here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all for now, but do stay tuned for headlines on the hour within this news.